Genevieve Wooden,
Present.
Tim Fitzgerald,
Here.
George Pond,
Present.
Tracy Langworthy,
Here.
and Councilmember Davis has excused herself for tonight.
Are there any changes to the minutes of April 6th or study session notes? Yes, Mr. DiTilio?
I had a change to the minutes, but I contacted the city clerk. Did you have those changes available for the council?
For April 6th,
Well,
That
for
was
the,
study session, last meeting.
no, actually, the meeting for the last council meeting,
Should've been the
when we
fourth.
talked
Yeah.
about the truck.
yeah, those are changed. This is for April 6th.
If there's no further changes, the minutes are approved. Oh, now we have proclamations and ceremonies, which I'm going to go to the podium. This is proclamation season. So we have 3 of them, starting with the Arbor Day and Tree City USA. Mark, what do you want to come forward? Whereas Arbor Day is May 2nd, 2015, whereas trees have always been regarded as an important asset to the citizens of the community of Wheat Ridge, providing one of the first business opportunities in the 1860s, and whereas our mature trees are suffering from the devastation of environmental stresses, including insect and disease, winter drought, and severe temperatures, and whereas the City of Wheat Ridge has been awarded Tree City USA by the National Arbor Foundation, now therefore I, Joyce J., Mayor of the City of Wheat Ridge, do hereby declare Saturday, May 2nd as City of Wheat Ridge Arbor Day celebration, and encourage all citizens and businesses of Wheat Ridge to participate in this effort by planting a tree or a shrub. Let me give this to Margaret.
Thank you, Mayor, for the time on the agenda tonight, and councilors. I'm here, I'm Keith Wood with the Colorado State Forest Service, and I'm here to present Wheat Ridge its 36th annual Tree City USA Award. So you can be very proud of those years as Tree City. You're one of the few communities in the nation, really, that's getting close to 40 years. The 40-year anniversary of Tree City USA is coming up here in 2016. So Wheat Ridge was an early adopter of this program, and you've kept it going for 36 years, so congratulations on that. There's 4 standards that you've met every year to get that Tree City Award. First and foremost, you have to have folks like Margaret and Rick and Joyce here who oversee and administer the tree planting and care program in Wheat Ridge. And they've been doing that for a lot of years here, and you can see that with a canopy that's been planted over the years in the city of Wheat Ridge. So that's the first thing we look for, those staff folks are in place. Second thing is a tree ordinance is in place. Third thing is a little budget around tree planting and care. It's $2 per capita. And then the fourth is the Arbor Day observance, which you're having here this weekend, it sounds like, and doing some planting in the Greenbelt tomorrow with the group, and also the proclamation that was read is the 4th standard. So a little bit about what I've seen going on in Wheat Ridge too over the last couple years is our district office in Golden has been working closely with Margaret here on the tree inventory. And I think that's a very important thing to keep updated, to get done first and foremost, and to keep updated because of the threats that we have to our urban forest now. You've probably heard of emerald ash borer in Boulder, and a big component of our urban forest are ash trees. So it's good to know where those are, the valuable ones we can preserve and save, and then the ones we may want to replace or start phasing out. So the inventory has been a good project here, and it's going to lead to bigger and better things with the urban forest and Wheat Ridge as well. So I just wanted to say congratulations to you and award the 36th Tree City to Wheat Ridge and say keep up the good work as well. Congratulations.
If I could, I'd just like to take the time. Keith has been with us. We were thinking, just talking about it since 2002. And Keith has been instrumental in getting us through all the storms that we've had, all the damage, replanting. And then, like he said, Keith has also been very instrumental in getting out a lot of the information on emerald ash borer, and has definitely been such a great help to the city and to the forestry section. So, excuse me, I'd like to thank you for that. And then also, again, just extend the invitation to everybody for Hopper Hollow, the grand opening for the sculpture dedication, along with Arbor Day. So thank you very much.
36 years, wow. All right, this is a proclamation for Older Americans Month, 2015. Whereas the city of Wheat Ridge includes a thriving community of older Americans who deserve recognition for their contributions and sacrifices to ensure a better life for future generations. And whereas the city of Wheat Ridge is committed to helping all individuals live longer, healthier lives in the communities of their choice for as long as possible. And whereas we recognize the value of community engagement and service in helping older adults remain healthy and active while giving back to others. And whereas our community can provide opportunities to enrich the lives of individuals of all ages, now therefore, the mayor and the city council of the city of Wheat Ridge do hereby proclaim May 2015 to be Older Americans Month. We urge every resident to take time this month to celebrate older adults and the people who serve and support them as powerful and vital individuals who greatly contribute to the community. And our final proclamation. Please step forward, please. You know, he never has much to say. No. This is the week of May 10th through 16th as National Police Week, and May 15th as National Police Officers Memorial Day. Whereas the Congress and President of the United States have designated the week of May 10 through May 16 as Police Week and May 15 as Peace Officers Memorial Day, the members of the City of Wheat Ridge Department play an essential role in safeguarding the rights and freedoms of the citizens of Wheat Ridge. The Police Department of the City of Wheat Ridge has grown to be a modern community law enforcement agency which unceasingly provides a vital public service to your community in partnership with law-abiding citizens. Now, therefore, I, Joyce J., Mayor of the City of Wheat Ridge, call upon all citizens of Wheat Ridge and upon all patriotic, civil, and educational organizations to observe the week of May 10 through May 16 as National Police Week. I further call upon all citizens in the City of Wheat Ridge to observe Friday, May 15th as National Peace Officers Memorial Day, in honor of those peace officers who, through their courageous deeds, have lost their lives or have become disabled in the performance of their duty. Thank you.
Mayor and Council, thank you for this recognition. Two things I wanted to touch on just briefly. Just a reminder that on May 1st, when Colorado recognizes National Peace Officers Memorial Day, that we'll be adding the name of Sergeant Dave Baldwin from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office to that list of fallen officers. If you remember, Sergeant Baldwin passed away last year in a fatal traffic accident on Highway 93. And then secondly, I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank Mayor, City Council, City Manager, and the citizens of Wheat Ridge for their support of the Wheat Ridge Police Department. This past 9 months, past year, have been dark days, I think, for law enforcement nationally. And we're seeing some unfortunate circumstances evolve in the community of Baltimore. And I think it's important to remember that there are over 700,000 men and women who serve their communities in some capacity in providing law enforcement services. And while these incidents are tragic and unfortunate, and we need to find the training and the causes for these kinds of incidents, it's always important to remember that the vast majority of the men and women who serve in this profession do so honorably. They do so to better their communities, and they do so to build, true collaborative and trusting relationships in their communities. So I want you to know, and I want the members of our community to know that as we look at these things, as they evolve on a national basis, my staff and I are constantly looking at these issues, trying to find the root causes for what occurred, and to do what we can do from a training perspective to make sure that similar kinds of things don't happen in our agency. And that's my commitment to you, that we'll always strive to provide that exceptional level of service and to make sure that our officers are well trained and responsive to the needs of this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Brennan. Oops. Okay, we're moving on to citizens' right to speak. Citizens who wish may speak on any matter not on the agenda for a maximum of 3 minutes. And we ask you to sign the public comment roster, and we do have some. I see Mr. Clark is ready. Please give your name and address.
Hi, my name is John Clark, 4665 Swadley Street. That's kind of a tough act to follow, but I'm going to give it a shot. It's been brought to my attention that I hardly ever have any nice things to say during my 3 minutes here at council. So I'm going to tonight be the glass is half full guy and start by thanking council for supporting the engineering team over at Wheat Ridge High School. Especially thank Councilman DiTullio for his generous support of that program. I also want to thank a few other people. They're not here tonight, but I'm sure they'll get the message. Sheila Atwell and the folks over at Jeffco Students First for coming out and supporting these great kids. Also, the Board of Education members, John Newkirk, Julie Williams, for showing support and realizing what a great opportunity this has been for these Jeffco kids. And speaking of opportunities, I want to thank Wheat Ridge High School and Chuck Sprague for allowing me to be the parent chaperone on this trip to Detroit. I've chaperoned a lot of trips in my day, but none quite like this. And we left with 12 kids to Detroit, and we came back 5 days later with 12 kids. So my job was secure. I'd also like to thank those 12 kids for allowing me to share in this trip of a lifetime with them. I'm telling you, you couldn't ask for 12 better kids. They were always polite, well-behaved, very respectful. And in 5 days, I never heard one F-bomb. And if you've been in a high school or a middle school lately, the F word is used quite frequently. A few F-bombs are dropped, but not one in the 5 days. So they had a great work ethic and took teamwork to a whole new level. So I know I couldn't be prouder of my son, and I know the parents of the other kids that I've met feel the same way. And just in case you've been living in a cave for the last couple of weeks and haven't heard, the team won the prototype hydrogen fuel cell division and brought home the hardware in the first international championship to Wheat Ridge High School they've ever had. So for tonight, I will be that glass is half or maybe completely full guy, and maybe next council meeting I can come back and be the glass is half empty guy. And just so you guys have something to ponder about, we had that conversation, excuse me, with these kids that went to Detroit. And you ask them if the glass is half full, the glass is half empty, and they've pretty much always come to a consensus that it's neither. It's the glass is engineered wrong. So this is the future, and these 12 kids I couldn't be prouder of. So thank you.
Thank you.
Monica Duran, 2980 Upham Street. Good evening, City Council. Lower that a little bit. It's time to nip the so-called Starker Plan in the bud. The options in the plan that have been proposed were already requested by citizens, business owners, council members DiTullio and Urban in the past 2.5 years. Staff followed the same public process during the Streetscape project from Sheridan to Harlan back in 2000. This plan is not the plan of one person, as taunted by Joyce J. in an election year. Additionally, it is only one option with a 4-3-4 lane design. Back in the fall of 2014, staff was given direction in a study session to bring back several options for 38th Avenue for public review and comment. What happened to that direction? The public deserves options. Staff needs to design an option which is 4 lanes from Sheridan to Wadsworth. Remember, Pierce Street West was 5 lanes, 2 to the east, 2 to the west, and a center turn lane. So a 4-lane design would be a compromise and a win-win as long as there is a streetscape component with improved sidewalks, pedestrian lighting, landscaping, and etc. I'm here once again to ask council not to make the same mistake twice by offering only one public choice for the reconfiguration and streetscape of 38th Avenue. Let me repeat, I'm here once again to ask council to not make the same mistake twice by only offering the public one choice for reconfiguring the streetscape of 38th Avenue. The road diet and 2B were a failure. Let's not repeat it. As directed by City Council in the fall, staff has a duty to their community to bring back more than one option for 38th Avenue for public comment and review. And please remember that council works for the public, not for the city manager. Thank you.
Thank you. Larry?
Larry Matthews, 3851 Hoyt Street. I've titled tonight's snippet, A Tale of Two Cities. In 1970, my wife and I rented our first apartment in Wheat Ridge down on Eaton Street. We had 2 girls. We lived there for a while. Eventually, that did not meet our needs anymore. So we rented half a duplex out on Parfit Street, and our girls had their own yard. They had their own driveway, and they could be free-range kids and ride their trikes down to their friend's house a couple houses down the street. We had this breather space to look for a new home, our own home that was our dream. And at the time, we couldn't find what we needed, what met our needs in Wheat Ridge. So we decided we had to look out in the country. After a while, we found a place in the country, and everyone asked us, what did you want to move way out there for? Well, in 1973, way out there was 88th and Wadsworth in a city called Westminster. We had a cornfield to the north of our street. We had a wetland area to the south of us, and life was pretty good. And the kids could ride their bikes and had their own yard and their own driveway. And then they plowed in the cornfield and built houses. Nothing wrong with that. It's going to come. But they had to make them a little closer together, a little smaller, a little more crowded. And then they filled in the wetland area, and they built smaller houses yet with sump pumps in the basement. And that wasn't enough people, so they started building 2-story townhouses attached. And pretty soon, you couldn't get down the street at 3 o'clock in the afternoon anymore. And the schools went to year-round sessions, split sessions, and of course the school district couldn't figure out that 2 kids from the same family ought to be in the same session. So our family literally had year-round school. It was time to get out of Dodge again. We put our kids in parochial school while we looked for a house down in a city called Wheat Ridge. Took us a while. Meantime, the school district let us open and roll our kids down here. We brought them down to Wilmore Davis and Everett. And we finally found a house that met all our needs here at home again in Wheat Ridge. And in 1983, in a city called Wheat Ridge, we had less congestion, less crowdedness, a higher quality of life than they had out in the country at 88th and Wadsworth in a city called Westminster. And that's my personal reason for being opposed to high-density housing that I know some people on the council are pushing for. We're kind of just still called farmers here. But even a farmer knows if you try to put 5 gallons of stuff in a 2-gallon bucket, you end up with a big mess. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any further comments, either signed up or not? Okay, let's move on to the regular meeting.
Madam Mayor, in response to the public comment, I wanted to ask Mr. Brink, is there going to be a couple of different options coming forth for 38th Avenue as that study session went? Or are we looking at one option now?
I can address that. We have this scheduled for May 11th, and yes, staff will be bringing forward all options. The May 11th meeting will be a general open discussion with City Council on how they would like to move forward.
May 11th, and then more than one option?
Or I'm sorry, May 18th.
And there'll be more than one option on that?
We probably won't be bringing specific options to May 18th. We need more general direction from City Council and their response and feedback to the Starker plan.
You mean the community plan that's been discussed previously?
The plan that Mr. Starker presented to City Council and that we got direction to look at.
So do you need more direction to look at the same plan with 4 lanes tonight?
Again, we're going to be bringing it back on May 18th to look to ask council at that time for more direction on how you'd like to move forward. 4 lanes, 5 lanes, 3 lanes, 2 lanes, Sheridan to Wadsworth to Pierce, Wadsworth to Upham, whatever. We need more direction at that point. At this point, we don't have that direction. If you want to give direction tonight, that's fine. We can take that and bring that on the 18th. We don't plan to bring any specific designs or specific plans to May 18th. We need more direction at this point.
Okay.
Thank you. I did not get approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to tonight's agenda? None? Fine. Agenda stands. Move on to resolution number 27, 2015. Genevieve?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to introduce resolution number 27-2015, a resolution adopting the 2015 Parks and Recreation Master Plan, and by such adoption amending the Envision Wheat Ridge Comprehensive Plan. At issue, the current Parks and Recreation Master Plan was completed in 2006, and many of the recommendations in that plan have been accomplished. Due to the changing needs and conditions of the city and the importance of park and recreation programs and amenities in accomplishing the goals and visions outlined for the city, a new master plan was commissioned. The new plan is based on information gathered from the community by conducting a community survey, meeting with a variety of focus groups, and interviews with elected officials. The new master plan will provide the city with a vision as well as a policy document by which to guide future decisions regarding facilities and park amenities for the next 10 to 15 years.
Thank you. We have a staff report.
We do. We have a short summary of the plan and the process used to complete the plan. So thank you, Mayor and Council. In September of 2014, we contracted with Greenplay and Associates to complete a new master plan for the Parks and Recreation Department. And that project process included a public process, which included focus group interviews, online feedback, a formal citizen survey, of which 324 were returned, an analysis of, or an assessment of the city demographics and trends. It also included an inventory and analysis of all the facilities and programs within the system, maintenance operations, and a financial analysis. There was a findings report to staff and the advisory board, the Parks and Recreation Commission, and then the plan also includes recommendations and actions. Reoccurring themes that we heard from the public during this input process includes a list before you. The public felt we had a high level of service and programs and parks, well-maintained facilities, special event location, and more events desired, a need for updating selected parks and facilities, greenbelt access, preservation, and improvement, improved communications and marketing of what the Park and Recreation Department is offering to citizens, improved hours of operations, and then we also heard that we had capacity constraints. So lots of people in our buildings and parks. Staffing restraints, and then aging population needs. So expansion of our improvement of our active adult center programs. Included in the plan, and it's a 102-page document, is an analysis of all the programs, recreation programs offered, analysis of park access, including ADA access, as well as proximity to residences, assessment of park conditions, demographic and trends information, and recommendations for moving forward for the next 10 to 15 years. recommendations include redevelopment of Anderson Park and Prospect Park, expand wellness fitness spaces in the recreation center, create a Greenbelt master plan, so a special study that focuses just on the Greenbelt, and investigate remodel or expansion of current active adult center. The entire plan will be posted on the website, as well as the expanded presentation on what's included in the plan and the executive summary. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions at this time? I believe a resolution is in order.
Is a motion in order?
A motion is in order.
I move to adopt Resolution Number 27-2015, a resolution adopting the 2015 Parks and Recreation Master Plan, and by such adoption, amending the Envision Wheat Ridge Comprehensive Plan.
I'll second.
Any questions or comments? It's a very large plan, very comprehensive. I was amazed. You've really done a great job. Thank you so much. May we please poll the council?
Motion carries 7-0.
Okay, thank you very much, Joyce. And item number 2 would be Councilmember Starker.
Be happy to read that, Mayor, as soon as
Oh,
I can scroll down through about 100 pages. Or maybe there's a better way to do it.
you want to read mine?
I get it. Okay. This is council item number 2. This is resolution number 25-2015, a resolution of the Wheat Ridge City Council supporting a change in the countywide dog licensing fee to benefit the operations of the Foothills Animal Shelter. At issue in this matter, the Foothills Animal Shelter Board of Directors is recommending a change to the dog licensing fee. The current dog licensing fee is $15 for altered dogs and $30 for unaltered dogs. The recommended fee change is to $20 flat fee. This is the first fee increase since the inception of the countywide dog licensing program in 2007. Revenue generated from the dog licensing program directly benefits the operations of the Foothills Animal Shelter. This resolution is in support of this fee change and demonstrates to the Jefferson Board of County Commissioners that Wheat Ridge supports this fee change. The fee increase is scheduled before the Jeffco Board of County Commissioners in late May or early June with an effective date of mid-July.
Thank you. Is there any staff report or staff report on this at all?
I don't have a formal presentation, but happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Council have any questions? Mr. Urban.
Thank you. My question on this item is relative to the information regarding the animal shelter. It indicates the total revenue for the shelter, the dog licensing revenue is approximately 32% of the total shelter revenue, but do we have any indication of what the costs are for dog licensing to the shelter?
I can get you that information, Councilmember Urban. Just give me a minute here. It's approximately $274,000, $285,000 in terms of the adopted budget for 2015.
And that's the adopted budget for the animal shelter, correct?
For the licensing portion, so those are the licensing expenditures. This is a program that Jefferson County previously administered,
Sure.
and that was shifted over to the animal shelter.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or discussion? Go ahead, please.
Motion
Give us a
in order?
Yes.
I move to approve resolution number 25-2015, a resolution of the Wheat Ridge City Council supporting a change to the countywide dog licensing fee for the benefit, fee to benefit the operations of the Foothills Animal Shelter.
May I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Langworthy.
Madam Mayor.
Questions? Comment?
No questions. I was just going to make a comment that, first the city had to come up with $179,000 to offset a debt that the previous fundraising board from the shelter didn't satisfy. And then now they're trying to balance their budget on dog fees when only 25% of the county has registered their dogs or their pets. So I think that my problem with this is that I don't really have a good trust factor with the shelter board or the previous shelter fundraising group. I think they really ought to go back to the drawing board, come up with a better way to fund and support this organization. I personally have no problem with the operational folks that are there every day working with the pets, working with the pet owners, but it seems to be a management issue at the top when it comes to funding. So at this time, I won't be supporting any changes to this until they come back with a better plan.
Any other comments? Ms. Wooden?
I believe it was explained to us before that the reason we had to pay that amount was because of a prior commitment made by all the cities to the animal shelter. And so we were just fulfilling a prior commitment made several years ago. And again, I support the animal shelter in the services they provide for us. And I do see the need for raising their fees to keep up with the changing economy and what they're trying to handle. So I will support this. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Urban?
I guess my concern relates to the imbalance between the amount of revenue generated from the dog licensing fees and the actual costs related to that, which seemed, based on the memo, we had information relative to 32% of the $3.1 million budget was relative to the dog licensing revenue, but the cost didn't seem to be equal that amount of, let's say it's approximately $1 million in costs. So my concern is that there's a mismatch between what the dog licensing revenue is already covering. It seems like it's already covering the dog licensing related activities. Is that not the case?
Well, perhaps I can clarify. The adopted budget for 2015 for the revenue that the shelter expects to bring in from licensing is approximately $798,210. And so the figure in the council action form of 3.1 million was the overall shelter expenditures. There is a imbalance in terms of the revenue that the shelter is bringing in compared to expenditures, and that's an issue that the board of directors is trying to address through the development of the long-term plan that they developed in the fall of 2014 with the support of the city managers and the county manager. So increasing the dog licensing fee is one piece of an overall approach. The second primary piece that the shelter board is addressing is through fundraising and looking to grow revenue in that respect. For 2015, we're proposing to bring in about $604,000 in grants and contributions. For 2016, we're hoping to grow that to about $785,000 in revenue. So, in the past, we did have issues with the former foundation meeting their fundraising goals, and that's when the board of directors made a decision to go in a different direction in order to sustain the fiscal health of this organization in the long term.
Thank you, Ms. Geyer. Are there other questions then? Mr. DiTullio?
I think maybe it's my fault that I might probably talk a little bit too fast because I know where I'm coming from, what I understand. So let me repeat again. I support the operational field of the Foothills Animal Shelter, the people working there, supporting the pets, supporting the pet owners. What I don't support is a half-baked plan that's not holistic enough. I think Ms. Geyer just confirmed my comment that this raising the fees is one part of a bigger plan, and I would rather see the whole plan come forward so we could vote on an entire plan, or at least know what the entire plan is before we just willy-nilly raise fees. And like Mr. Urban had said, it's not even really covering the expense. So for me, I like to see a full plate of information. I have nothing against the Foothill Animal Shelter, or the operations, the people working there, the people in the field, the people in the trenches. It's the shelter board, the previous foundation board, and the current management of that facility at the top level. That's why I won't be supporting this tonight.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Urban?
I guess I'm just a little leery about the difference between a fee and a tax, and wanting to make sure if we're talking about a fee, that fee is specific to expenses that are incurred by an agency, and understanding that the Foothills Animal Shelter does a great job, and a significant portion of that job relates to dealing with our dog population. It makes sense that they would be supported by those fees, but based on the information that I have in front of me, knowing that the majority, if not the entirety of the dog licensing expenditures are already covered by the dog licensing revenue, and that additional revenue is going to fund the overall operations of the center, it just doesn't make sense right now to put forward this increase in a fee, because it seems as though it's already covering those expenses related to those activities.
Mr. Pond?
So a clarification and then a comment, but our action tonight is not going to raise a fee. This is action by the county commissioners, and so our vote and hopefully our comments stand as an indication to them where we're at. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
So, and I do hope, however we vote, and I think this has been good comments, is there a possibility that they can not only get the results of our vote, but also the comments and transcripts so that they have those as well?
Sure, of course.
That'd be great, thanks.
Just to clarify too, Mayor, that there is an IGA between all the cities that the dog licensing revenue goes towards the operations of the center. So there is agreement in place that it doesn't just cover the dog licensing expenses, but it does cover a portion of the operation expenditures.
Any more comments? Please cast your votes.
Motion carries 5-2 with council members Urban and DiTullio voting no.
Item number 3, Councilmember Fitzgerald.
This is a bid motion. The Wheat Ridge Business District is requesting its 2015 budget approval appropriation for revitalization incentive grant programs in the amount of $45,000. Expenditures over $35,000 require City Council approval. The Wheat Ridge Business District offers 4 grant programs for Wheat Ridge businesses. The grant programs are matching grants with varying limits. For every $1 spent by the business, the Wheat Ridge Business District will match $1 up to those limits. We offer the following programs: a revitalization incentive program, which includes facade and sign improvements, and accessibility grant programs, commercial exterior paint programs, and a landscaping program. So this is just to further their ability to issue those grants. Is the motion in order?
I believe it is.
Okay, I move to approve funding in the amount of $45,000 to the Wheat Ridge Business District for revitalization, accessibility, and landscape improvement grant programs for fiscal year 2015.
May I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Pond. Is there any discussion or questions? You're a member of the business district, as I recall.
That's right.
Any questions? Mr. DiTullio?
So when I sat on this board as mayor and my predecessor was here, they demanded and berated, basically they wanted financials of what the board had spent their money on. And except for a letter in here from Mr. DeMott, which is pretty general of what the money's been spent on, where's the budget, the finances that was demanded over and over again. And I thought that was set part of the agreement, that they would supply us with a budget every time they requested the funds, rather than just a letter. So do we have a budget? Do we have a expenditures, balance sheet? from the Wheat Ridge Business District explaining where the money went and who it went to and how that tax money was spent?
I don't believe that we do have that, and I think it's a valid request. I'm also on that board, and I think a list of previous expenditures would be a good addition to that.
It's available, can be printed out.
So how are we going to get that? Is it just going to happen, or do we need to make an amendment?
Why don't we make an amendment? It's easily provided, they've got the information, so.
So I'd like to make an amendment that before any funds are dispersed, that the Wheat Ridge Business District will supply the City Council, the City of Wheat Ridge, their balance sheet and profit and loss, whatever they have for financials before the money is released.
Are you referring to basically a list of where the grants approved?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's my motion.
Would it be appropriate to have them come and speak to us then? Because I think that generally what they have done is come and speak and bring information at that point. I don't want to just get an email, but if they want to come and talk about what they've spent it on and the benefits they've seen, it would be good for us to hear.
Well, I just wanted a letter from them with their letterhead from Britta Fisher as their administrative services person. It could be from Britta Fisher as long as it's documented on a piece of paper that acknowledges the Wheat Ridge Business District. I don't know if we need to type a study session with it, but I know it was always requested in the past. So for me, it's just a memo from the board.
I believe the former president of the board president usually did a presentation and gave us that.
I was just going to say that the grants are usually readily visible to the public. They're either new signs or landscaping or something like that that can be seen by the public. So I think if we get the list, that would be pretty clear exactly what's happened.
Well, my motion needs a second anyway.
Second.
Okay, let's see where we're at now.
I have a question.
I'd like to hear the amendment rephrased, please.
My amendment was to, before any funds are dispersed to the Wheat Ridge Business District, that financials would be reported back to the City Council of the City of Wheat Ridge via memo or some type of letterhead indicating what their money had been spent on, expenses and
what the grants
costs, grants.
What the
And
list of the grants.
Yeah, basically a balance sheet or a profit and loss, whatever they have to show where the money came from and where it went. And that was seconded by Mr.
And I
Pond.
have a second from Mr. Pond.
And just for clarification, from my understanding, to make sure that that I understand this, if we approve this amendment and subsequently approve the main motion to approve funding, the documentation is just a document. I mean, we've approved the funding; it's going to happen. It's just we want the documents in place. Thank you for it.
Mr. Starker has a question.
So are we looking for a balance sheet and a profit and loss, or a list of projects and the amount of money that they spent in the last year, I guess?
It's whatever they have to show where the money went, where it came from, and who it went to, and any costs involved in those projects. Because there's an administrative fee that's paid every time a project goes through. So I think it's only fair that since it's coming from the city and it's taxpayer money, that we get that list on Wheat Ridge Business District letterhead.
It's already been seconded.
It's already been seconded, so we are really voting now on the main motion.
Amendment to the motion.
Oh, we haven't voted on the amendment yet, thank you. Please vote on the amendment, which,
Motion carries 7-0.
we have an amendment to that motion. Now we will vote on the main motion, which will give the funding to the Wheat Ridge Business District.
Further discussion on that.
More discussion on that.
Yeah, do we have more discussion on that? No? Mr. Urban does.
Yes. With respect to the administration of the dollars, it indicates that Wheat Ridge 2020 will help administer the program. Are they doing that themselves, or do they have a third party that does that for them?
Wheat Ridge 2020 administers the program, staffs the Wheat Ridge Business District.
Okay. So my understanding is that there was another entity, funding partners, that helps administer some of the loan programs for Wheat Ridge 2020. Is that different from this?
Maybe Councilman Fitzgerald or the mayor can speak to that since they're on the board.
That is a different.
It is different.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is strictly the money
The
the
city's
city gives
45,000.
for grant.
This is a very narrow focus.
Right.
Right.
Did I answer your question? Okay. All right, any other questions or comments before we vote on the main motion? Seeing none, we can go ahead and please poll the council.
Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you. That's the end of our business items, although we do have some other discussion. Where did I done with mine? Well, I've sort of lost mine, but. Oh, here it is. I put it in the back here. Mr. Westberg, will you be discussing the floodplain regulations?
Thank you, Your Honor, members of the council. The three numbered discussion items here are essentially some proposed tweaks, additions, revisions to the city code that we're presenting to you tonight for information purposes, for further discussion, comments you may have. No actions necessary tonight, but we wanted to bring this in front of you for further action later to consider. Mark's going to do a little bit of a presentation here. He'll pause after each segment here, after floodplains, after the electrical regulations, so forth, to encourage some questions during his presentation here, because there's quite a bit here to digest, and we'll pause as we go through it here and during the presentation, and I'll let Mark take it away.
Thanks. This originally started as just a floodplain thing, and we thought since we're here, we'll take care of some other business while we're at it. So tonight we're going to talk about floodplain regulations, which is near and dear to my heart, as most of you probably have figured out by now. And we have one little thing to talk about with electrical stuff, and then some traffic regulations. We're working with the police department on a couple things that have come up, and so we got slimed with doing this for them too, which we don't mind doing. We don't mind doing this. There's one other thing that came up based on a meeting we had with Mr. Dahl on Thursday and a little bit of a scramble we had on Friday. We want to just talk about something. We really need direction from you guys on all of these things. So on the floodplain stuff, what we're proposing to do is there's four little amendments that we want to do that in reading through the CRS program that we're part of, adopted a new manual, which is really beneficial to us points-wise. But there's some things in there that we read through that we can get some points for that also, I think, have some value and some benefit for our residents, both from a tenant standpoint, from a property owner standpoint. So the first one is landlords disclose their floodplain status. What this does, it alerts the tenants before they rent the property that they know it's in a floodplain or not. They then have the opportunity to go get contents insurance for what's within the property. They obviously wouldn't get it for the building itself. They would just get it for their belongings, if you will. The other two are related. It's a couple things that will help to alert folks as to what the floodplain is in their property. The first one is that lot surveys show floodplain boundaries. Now, this is the surveys that people turn in with their building permits when they're looking to get a building permit for an addition or a new house or a garage or a large shed or something like that. And then once that construction starts, if that permit gets approved and they start construction, that they would stake the floodplain boundary on their property. And this, in my mind, is to keep creep from happening. You know, the contractor says, you know, we just dug out your basement. We got 3 truckloads of dirt. If we just spread those over here, it'll level out that low area and it'll really help you out. Well, that low area just might be floodplain. So we want to make sure everybody that's out there, including the contractor, knows what's going on. The last thing is no new septic systems in the floodplain. It just seems like a bad idea. So the impacts to those is that with the first one is that renters policies can start as low as $50 per year. Now, I don't know how much that covers. I just saw in a blurb that was on the NFIP website, said $50 per year is as low as that renters policy starts, which is pretty cheap. We do an annual mailing to everybody in the floodplain to invite them to our annual open house that we have in March of every year. And so in that annual mailing, we'll start to include a reminder of this regulation, should this pass, that landlords don't forget to tell your renters about if they're in the floodplain or not. And also, we mail it out to all not just the property owners, but also the tenants, if the property owner has a different address than the physical address, so that the tenants would get that same mailing, so they know that they maybe have an opportunity to go get flood insurance. And these last two things is going to actually fall on a pretty small number of properties. You know, anybody that's completely out of the floodplain, these two regulations wouldn't apply. Anybody that's completely within the floodplain wouldn't apply either. So it's only those properties that have the floodplain boundary actually going through their lots. So we think it's a pretty small impact on folks in that regard. And then the septic systems, we prohibit septic systems, but our code does have an exclusion for cases of extreme hardship. What we want to do is sort of close that loophole just on the properties that are in the floodplain, because when the water comes up, the groundwater comes up, the septic fails, and then we've got a little bit of a mess. Not just in the floodplain, but also probably in somebody's house or basement. So what this does for us, and I may have mentioned this, I'm a points guy. I'll call it points guy. I have another term I've sometimes told the mayor, but I won't say it here. What this does for us, it gives us a number of points for each one of these things. It gives us another 41 points total. What's that mean for us? It doesn't seem like a lot of points. What we have right now in the community rating system, we've got 2,021 points. We just barely squeaked into the Class 6 category. Every 500 points you go up, you raise a class. Even with being a Class 6, there's only 7 other Colorado communities that are Class 6 and above. What that does is it gives all of our folks a 20% discount on the insurance. And you know, for someone that would normally pay maybe $1,400 a year for insurance, that saves them, you know, $280, which is not a bad deal. We do have houses in our floodplains that potentially, I don't know that anybody's doing this, that could potentially be paying $10,000 to $15,000 a year for flood insurance because of the federal regulations that passed back in 2012 and 2013. That 20% becomes a really big deal for those folks. So what we're shooting for is, I've been reading through the manual. It's 600 pages long. I've skipped the 200 pages that deal with coastal flooding. I don't think that's an issue for us yet. We'll see how this whole global warming thing goes. What I'm up to so far is about 2,770 points, including the 41 points we're talking about tonight. What that does for us is, assuming all those points hold, because we're going to be going through a review of this with the folks that do that, we'd be a Class 5 community. There's only 3 other places and communities in Colorado that are Class 5. It's Fort Collins, who are the floodplain gods in Colorado. There's Boulder, you know Boulder, and then there's Arvada, the little town north of us. They actually have someone dedicated to doing this. So as this being a part-time job, we feel really good about what we've been able to accomplish as staff in doing this. What this gets for us is a 25% discount for all the folks. So, you know, for the guys that are paying, you know, $1,100 a year, they get another $100 off their flood insurance per year, and that's still, in my mind, a pretty big deal. For the guys that might be paying 10 or 15 grand, it becomes a much bigger deal. Now, there's a chance, I said so far because I'm not done, we may end up going over 3,000 points, which could put us as a Class 4. And Fort Collins is the only other city in Colorado that's a Class 4. There are some prerequisites to being a Class 4 that we've got to meet. I'm not sure we can meet all those. Rest assured, I'll be looking to figure out how. If we are able to do that, then we'd be able to get our folks a 30% discount. So if we can sort of get the points worked out this year that we get over 3,000, then next year we'll start working on those prerequisites and possibly coming to council for some budget to try to do that. But we'll see where that lands. I haven't fully investigated all those prerequisites. So that's the floodplain thing. Are there any questions on that?
Any questions on that? Ms. Wood?
Sorry, it doesn't reply directly to your point system, but about a year ago when we were having community meetings, you talked to me about this issue, and as many of these properties are in District 4, I had gotten a lot of calls from residents about this. And at one time you had mentioned that, I don't know if the city had already looked into it or what it was, but there might be a type of mitigation that the city could do to remove some areas from the floodplain. Is that still something we're remotely thinking of?
We are actively thinking of it all the time. So
Okay.
there were when the flood study was done back in 2007, 2008 timeframe, one of the things that followed up was a master plan with all these proposed projects. One of those is to do a project down in the Clearville neighborhood, downstream of 44th, basically from the pedestrian bridge back upstream towards 44th. That's, at that time, it was maybe a $2.5 million project. I like to round up. It's maybe a $3 million project. But with that project, we move 110 structures from the floodplain. We only have 488 structures in the floodplain. So that's, in my mind, that's a really significant thing. That's almost 20% of our houses, or 25% of the houses, removed from the floodplain by doing that project. Where the Denver water ponds are, if you guys are familiar with those, it's a couple holding ponds that they have just east of Kipling a little ways. We have found out from them, we asked if they could give those up, and they said no back in the day. But we found out from them that they probably will be giving those up. When they move Moffett up to Ralston, they're going to rebuild the Ralston plant and decommission Moffett as a treatment plant. They will likely dispose of those ponds. If we can get a hold of those ponds and knock those berms down, then we can remove another 50 or so people from the floodplain, most of whom were really impacted by this. They're in an area what's called shallow flooding, so they don't have a set flood elevation, so it's very hard to determine the flood elevation. And a lot of them have basements because they were built back when it wasn't a floodplain. So those folks have some very high rates if they've got flood insurance. And there were a couple of other smaller projects. There's one up at Lena Gulch, which is maybe about a $2 million project that we could do where we bought the 2 houses. I don't know, Tracy was here then. We bought 2 houses up there and demolished those that were in the floodplain. We've got about a $2 million project there that removes 15 houses from the floodplain. So we do have some of those kind of things that we could do if we had money.
Right, I was just hoping we could keep that in our minds as far as future solutions to the floodplain and the issues regarding that, because as these insurance costs go up for residents, there was some concern in District 4 of some of those homeowners that they may not be able to afford some of these costs, even with the great discounts that we are getting. So as a future plan, I still want us to consider and think about those plans as to how to remove some of those homes from the plan.
Absolutely. It's very conceivable that someone's flood insurance could cost what their mortgage is costing.
Yeah.
Very conceivable.
Yeah.
Okay, what we're looking at is if the council would be, that would be agreeable to these revisions. Did you have a question about it?
Yes, well, I have a comment. Basically, we were going to address a lot of these corrections in ballot question 2A. There was about $6 or $7 million in ballot question 2A that was going to be for flood mitigation. That was last year. So I still think that we should go and look at possibly going to the voters for a sunsetted, targeted ballot question of a mill levy and or a sales tax increase, some small one, that addresses these drainage issues, specifically in the floodplain, and then other drainage issues within the city. And I think one of the reasons why 2A failed is because it was not sunsetted. But if you go with a bonded or a sales tax or a mill levy increase that's sunsetted after these projects are completed, and we have a dollar amount that's going to say X amount of dollars fixes the floodplain plus 3 or 4 projects in the city, I think that would have a better chance of passing in November if it was a targeted, sunsetted ballot question that addressed the funding. That's just, I'd like for us to address that. If we could at least agree on something that we could all move forward towards in November to support, that would be one thing I'd be willing to look at.
Ms. Wooden?
I know we're getting off your flood topic, but I agree with that we should come up with a specific capital improvement plan to present to voters, hopefully in the fall. And I heard something from the city of Arvada that I really would like to consider, and that was that Arvada years ago in their sales tax put in a 0.1% that always went to capital improvements, and therefore, instead of sunsetting it, to always have a 0.1% going towards capital improvement projects for the city. And as you can tell, Arvada has huge projects going on that they're literally paying cash for right now because they had such a large capital improvement fund project. So I agree that we should look into a capital improvement ballot question in the fall and maybe consider putting a 0.1% to a permanent capital improvement plan.
I'm hearing a couple of comments on this as far as ballot questions. Is there more interest in this area, and should we put it on a study session?
I'd like to go back to the flood issue.
Okay, let's finish one at a time then. I'm going to finish this one here, the ballot issue. Do I have enough interest in that we want to put it on a study session?
I think it'd be good to put it on a study session and to prioritize what projects are important to us.
Okay. Do I have enough of it?
I guess a point of order, this isn't a topic of discussion on tonight's agenda, and because of that, I don't think it's appropriate to be making any kind of consensus or decision on it. I don't disagree or otherwise, want to derail that discussion, but I just don't think that this is the proper time or place.
I disagree with that. Council has the option to make a consensus or ask for direction to staff, and we've directed staff to put it on a future study session, so I think that's legitimate.
But we're in the middle of another item on the agenda, and this is...
And I appreciate what you're saying, Mr. Urban, I really do. This came up, and I think it's sounding like it's valid and there's interest in it. We can finish the flood discussion and then move on to that since this suggestion has been brought up. While we're at this particular discussion, it would be my feeling to go ahead and complete it as far as the ballot question is concerned. Do I have I need full consensus on this, or at least a
We
majority.
already got a consensus to put it on a study
But
session.
I need more than, I only have 3. All right. This is for a consensus thing. Okay. All right, so we're okay on that. Now let's go ahead and please move back to the flood discussion.
So we're just seeking direction on moving forward with these, and I know that
Yes.
Mr. Urban has a question.
Mr. Urban, please.
Thank you. With respect to the landlord disclosure element that's being requested, I would like to limit that to the landlord's actual knowledge of any flooding issues with the property, and then a direction given to the potential tenants to where they might be able to find independent information relative to that, instead of putting it on the landlord's lap to know whether it is in the floodplain or not. I would assume that they would know that, but I would want to make sure that it's some type of direction from the landlord to the tenant that says, check the FEMA website to see if it's in a floodplain. And I think all landlords should encourage their tenants to get coverage as far as renter's insurance. But I'm concerned about the landlord being required to be knowledgeable about floodplains. It is his property. He or she should be aware of that. But as we know, those maps may change from time to time, and it just would be, I think, more clear cut, and it would be not so much the landlord telling the tenant your property is going to flood, you need to get insurance. That sounds a little onerous, but trying to make sure that there's some type of independent entity that they can go and check, or not just relying on what the landlord thinks is the case.
Sure, we had a lot of discussion about this, and I see this being really similar to the lead paint thing that, when I was a rentor and I rented a house, I had a good landlord, so they followed all the rules, and they gave us a little thing that said there may be lead paint in this house. It's a similar kind of disclosure. We could make this a generic thing that says, your house may or may not, this house may or not be in a floodplain, please go check it out. Our one thought on this is, we are going to do an annual mailing. If this ordinance passes, we'll do another mailing. We just do a postcard mailing afterwards to all the properties, let them know this ordinance just passed, and we are looking to, if you have rental property if this is rental property, you need to disclose this to your tenants. We'll do a lot of outreach. I certainly don't want a landlord to get sued for something they didn't know about. So this is the 3rd year in a row now that we've done an annual mailing to every property in the floodplain. So everybody should know if they're in the floodplain or not, because they keep getting letters from me. So I completely understand your concerns. We think we've got ways around that and ways to mitigate that, to make sure that all the landlords really do know, and actually every March all the tenants are going to know they're in. We just would like the tenants to know before they rent the property, just so they can go ahead and get that renter's insurance, that contents only insurance. I always had renter's insurance. I thought it was I never used it, but I always had it.
Thank you.
So the tenants are notified once a year in March, so that particular address gets a postcard.
Yes, and we
So
actually
they-
send a letter out because we have a lot of stuff in the letter that we get points for.
So the address of the home gets a letter in addition to the address of the landlord? Okay.
Yeah, we sent it to both. And we had a mailing of 500 and some odd in March. And certainly, we planned on having, this comes up later in the conversation, we planned on having a public meeting when this was just a floodplain thing, and I was going to send another mailing out to everyone in the floodplain. We got to talk about how we're going to do that now that we have these other things folded into it. But I certainly was planning on having another public meeting for the floodplain folks, because I think it's a good idea, and we can get some points for it.
I'm curious, how many households would be involved?
I don't know. We've got 488 buildings total, but that counts every shed over 120 square feet. So that's the number of buildings that we have in our floodplain is 488
Okay.
total. So that's you take out one shed per property, or one shed for every 3 properties or something, and we've got a fair number still. So
That's substantial.
it's a pretty big mailing once we include all the property owners and potential tenants.
And there will be community meeting on this as well.
Yeah, we had planned on doing
And
it.
we will be looking at it as an ordinance
Yep.
in July, somewhere in there, August.
Yeah, sometime in the summer.
So discussion will continue on this. So at this point,
I just
Ms.
ask for consensus that we move ahead with the suggestions for the future ordinance.
Do we have
flood.
consensus on that? We do. Okay, the next one.
Next one's easy. So there's a long discussion in the write-up in the staff report about why we're doing this. So I'm not going to go into all of that, but it's basically we just require electrical permit for any electrical work that's in the right-of-way. Excel's we've kind of pushed Excel out of the business of doing this. We're taking it on ourselves for a lot of reasons that are outlined in the staff report. So that's really what we're just looking at. In doing that, we didn't realize that we didn't require, our building department didn't feel like they actually had authority in the right of way because their authority is mostly on private property. So this would just be a change, and I believe it'll be in Chapter 5. We're going to have our city attorney's office help us with that. That would require an electrical permit in the right of way. It would be just like every other electrical permit out there. It's an additional building permit. There will be some additional inspections on the part of city staff. But ensures that the electrical work that's in the right of way meets our standards. And this would not just be on the PED and the street lights that we're installing as a part of our city projects, or that people like Sprouts are installing as a part of their project and stuff. This would also include the traffic signal installations. Our traffic signal techs have been handling those inspections up till this point, but those guys really are low voltage experts. They're the 12-volt guys, the stuff that runs through the controllers and stuff. They're not the 120-volt guys. So we really want to get our guys in the building department tapped into doing more of these inspections for us, and they've got the expertise for it and stuff. And we've talked with our building division and with our community development director, and he's supportive of doing this as is indicated in the staff report. So
Once again,
that's that one.
Mr. Starker?
Would this include only the wiring and electrical components, or would this include the structure that supports the poles?
It's just the wiring and electrical stuff. The structure is handled by our inspectors inspect all those other things.
So you already inspect the footings and foundations for the poles?
Yeah, we do all that. This is just for the electrical stuff, because that's the part that our guys don't know.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Urban?
So is it it's indicating in the memo that the city owns the streetlights, the pedestrian lights and whatnot in that right of way. So who's constructing those elements?
Well, often, for instance, on the Kipling Trail project that we're about to start construction on, our contractor is going to build those. But on the case like at the Sprouts development, MVG's contractor installed those lights as a part of the development. When the Town Center North project was done by, and I can't remember their name, when it was done by the guys up there, that was done by their contractor. In those cases, we with MVG, our building inspectors went ahead and went out and inspected it just to make sure it was done right, but they really, they didn't have that authorization in the code to do so. So we really want to get this lined out and done this way. So it can be done by several, and the big thing is that Excel just doesn't give us a break on LED fixtures, and we just should not be paying a sodium or a halide rate for what we're getting out of LEDs. It's just ridiculous. So that's a lot of the reason why we're doing this. Plus, if they're ours, we get to hang banners on them without asking permission.
Sounds like a welcome ordinance.
So this isn't a situation where the city's pulling a permit to do our own work, right?
No, on those, our inspectors would go out and do the inspection.
No, I mean on the work that we're contracting to do, like on the Kipling Trail.
No, we might still have them get a permit, maybe a no-fee permit. We wouldn't charge the contractor.
Okay.
We're inspecting the contractor's work, yeah, not our own work.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're, yeah.
So that subcontractor would come get the permit for that, but we'll do those as no fees because we end up paying it anyway, so.
Right, okay.
Do I need a consensus on this?
So moved.
We do.
We do.
So moved.
Thank you. And finally, traffic regulations regarding bicycles.
So as we charge ahead on these bike projects, we've run into some things in talking with our folks over in traffic, John Pickett in particular. We had a sit down with some of the folks in PD. And right now, our code doesn't specifically prohibit parking in marked bike lanes. And these are the ones that actually have the stencil on the ground, is the ones we're talking about, not just a sign. It's got to have the stencil on the ground. And so what we've done is we can't really enforce those. We can't go out and enforce those unless we have a sign up that says no parking in the bike lane at all the bike lane things. And so our reason for doing this is just to avoid that. The other thing is about bike boxes. We'll talk more about what a bike box is here in a minute. There's a picture in your code. I learned about those 2 weeks ago. But it would allow the bicycle to pass a stopped car, a car that stopped at a light. A bike could pass those to access the bike box. Along 32nd Avenue, we don't have bike lanes all the way through the intersections. We have to stop them when all the turn lanes happen because we run out of space. And so this allows those bikes to ride between the cars to go up and park in that bike box to then do what the bike box allows them to do. So again, John told us that if the bike does that, he could ticket them. Now, most people won't, but you should ticket a bike that's passing a car that's stopped in a lane of traffic. So what that bike box does is say that 3 times real fast, provides a safe place for the bicycles at the intersection. And the other thing is that we've got a lot of parking spaces along 38th Avenue that are signed for 2-hour parking only. And at a recent council meeting, we're going to do some more at 30-minute parking. And right now, what our police tell us is that they can't enforce that. There's nothing in our code that allows them to enforce those. So this is just a thing to make that happen. So the impacts of that is we get to reduce our signage. When we do new projects, we'll probably still put up some signs that say no parking in the bike lane, just as an education thing. And so our thought is as we start the 32nd Avenue project, we're going to take some signs off Pierce if we haven't done so already. And we're going to reuse those no parking in the bike lane signs along 32nd Avenue and put those in at a pretty regular interval, just as an education thing. If we do another bike project next year, the year after, we'll probably recycle those signs and keep sort of moving them as we go along, and we'll take them off of the existing installations that have been there for a period of time when people have figured out that there's no parking in the bike lanes. I drove Pierce today, and right next to a no parking sign, I saw a car parked in the bike lane. The bike box access, as I mentioned, it currently prohibits the passing of the cars. And if we're able to enforce that time-restricted parking spaces, we'll have better utilization of those because people know they'll get a ticket. Certainly the first few times and probably the first several months of this, they'll put warnings out instead of actually issuing tickets while we're getting people educated. So this is what a bike box is. It's just an area up at the front, in front of the cars, between the cars and the crosswalk basically. The bikes are allowed to ride up to and then park in, so that when the light goes green, they get the first chance to get going across the street, so they're not just stuck back in the queue of traffic. So it gets them up there where they can get going and then get in that marked bike lane. Once they clear the turn lanes on the other side of the street at all these places along 32nd, there'll be another marked bike lane for them to go into. I don't know if there are any of these installations in the metro area. They've used them in Portland quite a bit. This is an idea that came from Europe. It's worked out pretty well. I know Fort Collins has some. We heard today that Fort Collins has some. So we think this is a really good idea, especially in the situation where those bike lanes stop before they get to the intersection. It gets a way for the bikes to get up there and get through there safely. So that's what the bike box is. And I think now we're ready for questions on this round of stuff.
Questions on, we have bike boxes, no parking in the bike lanes, as well as Mr.
I'm kind of skeptical of this bike box thing because I have never seen one in my entire life, and I think that it would be more confusing to people than just not having one. I think bikers already move forward, and I've never seen one have a hard time getting going after the light turns green, and I've never seen anybody not be able to make a left-hand turn. So I think in practice it wouldn't work very well. Nobody knows what it would mean. They see this painting on the street, and I don't think anybody really knows what it means. So I'm very skeptical of the bike box.
Sure. When we talk to the bicycle community, most of them actually that we've talked to know about it, and they think it's a great idea for this application. But I understand the public maybe not. What we've seen is often where you see in the diagram it says wait here. They'll often have stop here or wait here as a message to the cars to stop at that location. So we think for what we've got going on, especially like at 32nd and Kipling, we think this is a really good idea for 32nd and Kipling, even 32nd and Wadsworth, with the travel patterns, because both those have right turn lanes. And so what happens a lot of times is the bikers will actually ride forward, get in their right turn lane, and then try to go straight, because that's where they think they should be. They should be on the edge of the road. And we don't want them to do that. We want them to be up in this bike box for them to move forward from that point if they're going straight. So this is really, I think, useful at places where we have the right turn lanes, the dedicated right turn lanes, and we have those all up and down 32nd where we've got these bike boxes proposed.
Mark, that wait here would be before you get to the bike box for this is instruction for the driver.
Yeah, like a stop here painted on the pavement or wait here or something.
I believe Mr. Pond has a question.
So maybe you've answered this, but as you were reviewing this, you did talk to the Wheat Ridge Active Transportation Advisory Team?
Yeah, we talked with some other folks, and we actually had a meeting today with a nationally renowned design group that has an office here in Denver, Tool Design. They're working with WAD's PEL project, and they thought for this application it was a really good idea too. They see a lot of this innovative, crazy stuff all over the country, and they thought this was a really good thing for this with having those bike lanes drop before the intersections.
Okay, well, I want to encourage the continued communication with that group. And the other question, I guess, is that what we would be giving you feedback on tonight is our feeling about whether or not these would be planned as part of the installation of bike facilities coming up in our future and budgeted into those projects. Is that correct?
Correct. And then also we could go back on.
Mostly asking if it was okay for the bikes to pass the cars to get to them.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, so you could break it down like
okay.
that.
So before you even get into painting, it's just it's the enforcement or non-enforcement of a bike passing a stationary vehicle.
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. DiTullio.
So as far as no parking in the bike lane, on Pierce, we have bike lanes, and we have bike lanes and park lanes. The park lanes are still going to stay. Those are fine.
Absolutely.
It'll
In
just
those
say no
areas-
parking.
Right, in those areas on the northern part where it's really wide and it's sort of a combo bike parking space there in front of the church and stuff, that doesn't change that at all. This will only be where there's a marked symbol on the pavement is the only place that will enforce that.
Well, I have to agree with some of the comments about the bike box. This discussion about, it sounds really great, and they're doing this in Europe, was exactly the conversation we had about back-end parking. And, you know, we're going to address this for a few bicyclists, and then we're going to agitate a bunch of drivers who have people driving between them to get to a spot in that road. And if you got a driver who's agitated and they're going to pop their door open for a bicyclist going through there because I think you're setting up us for a whole bunch of can of worms that you're going to have angry drivers, especially on busy times when bicyclists are going between them, and you're going to set yourself up for failure for a conflict. So I would tread lightly on this because this reminds me just of back-end parking. I wouldn't support it. In fact, if you did it as an ordinance, I would ask it to be a separate ordinance from everything else.
Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess my concern is when we start treating bicyclists different from motorists in the roadway, it will cause confusion amongst the different entities, the motorist or the cyclist. And I would prefer that they all adhere to the same rules so that bicyclists shouldn't be allowed to pass a car, just as another car shouldn't be able to pass another car within the proper circumstance. So I wouldn't be okay with having these bike boxes here just because it tends to create different rules for bicyclists than are permitted for motorists. Excuse me, I'm talking here. Thank you. I don't appreciate being interrupted or over-talked. Thank you. That's all I have to say on that. I don't want there to be separate rules for bicyclists and motorists because that confuses folks and it creates some ambiguity in the roadway, and bicyclists should be following the same rules as cars, and that would be my main concern.
Okay, any other comments?
Yes, I was actually just making a small comment about 32nd and Kipling that you brought up, and just mentioning briefly that I have traveled that road for 6 years while my daughter was over at Prospect Valley, and I've seen some of those bicyclists almost get hit. And because they are trying to navigate an intersection that at 32nd and Kipling can be quite challenging, especially when you have parents leaving. You have two schools that service that road, and you get a lot of traffic in the morning and a lot of traffic in the afternoon, and sometimes even in the middle of the day. So to me, I'm not sure that I know that this is the best solution to the problem, but if it gives those bicyclists a place to go besides kind of sit, because right now where they sit is in that right turn lane, and a car comes up and goes into that right turn lane, there could be a bicyclist that's going to be flattened. If this gives them a way to get out of that right turn lane and allow the traffic flow to continue in the right turn lane and give them a place to be safely out of the way, then that's what I would support, because I've seen a lot that almost get flattened, and I don't want to treat bicyclists different or the same. I mean, I think they're both very different transportation modes, and I think that you have to handle them respectfully each. And I wouldn't say that all bicyclists are inherently the most courteous, and not all cars are either, but if we can find a way that works that pulls them out of the lane of traffic and puts them where cars can actually see them, then I guess I would support that.
Thank you. Ms. Wooden? Oh, I'm sorry. Back and forth here.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mark. Back on the parking, and we have on Pierce Street, when we did that, north of, I want to say north of 44th, we have Sharrows, and we have a bicycle emblem in the street. if I interpreted your former comment, that would not allow parking on that, but I think the intention is to have parking on there.
Yeah, so that would be a sharrow. And
Okay.
We'll have the code language which say except for sharrows or other bike routes. We can have the code language be very specific to marked bike lanes, so that it'll only be those things that are actually designated. There's a white stripe on either side, and there's a symbol right in the middle of the road, and it's got a sign that says bike lane and that kind of thing. So what we have on that from 38th south on Pierce is where this would apply. North of 38th, from 38th to 44th, it wouldn't apply, and from 44th north, it wouldn't apply.
Okay, and for it to apply, you don't need two white lines delineating the bike lane. One line delineating the traffic lane from there to the curb, which is the bike lane.
Right.
But in this case, not a parking lane.
Right.
And what you're saying is that on a sort of a temporary and revolving basis, as we continue to develop our bikeways through the city, we will take some of the no parking signs that highlight that for the local residents and the people that drive that to
Yeah, as we do
cue
the
them.
project, right.
Okay.
We put those up just as an informational thing.
Okay, and I had another, if I may, a follow-up question on the bike box. You know, sort of an interesting concept. Do we have any data, empirical or anecdotal from other communities where this has been tried? Are we the tip of the spear on this idea?
No, it's been used in this country quite a bit. I think the one that we know of in Colorado was Fort Collins has them, and they just actually had a lessons learned thing on bike boxes. And we'll, before we stripe this stuff, we'll try to get a hold of that information and talk with the Fort Collins folks and find out about that. And if you're willing to take comment from the public, Scott's here.
I think that might be, I'm sorry.
Well, I'm concerned here that you're saying before we stripe, we're going to do this. You haven't been, there's no direction to do this yet. So I would like to hold off on this until we have more discussion with the council, because I think you're creating a conflict when you're giving special treatment to one group over the other. I know that motorists are already angry all the time. And if you have someone driving between the two cars, it's going to cause a conflict. So I don't want this, for me personally, I can't speak for anybody else, but I think to say before we stripe this, it hasn't been decided yet.
No, I think Mark misspoke when he said that. We're asking for direction tonight. If council decides not to move forward,
This
that's
is all
totally
about
fine.
direction as
Yep.
looking down the line a piece. Mr. Starker, had you finished?
Yes, I'm done.
Thank you. Mr. Pond?
Well, I think, I agree. I mean, I'm interested in understanding this more, so I'm not taking a position for or against it. I think there needs to be more understanding. I think that's what everyone's saying. And again, I think if the issue right here is about not ticketing bikes that are passing stationary vehicles, I support that this evening. And then I absolutely think we should be talking, again, we should talk to the active transportation team, and we should also be studying this as a council to understand moving forward before we put any paint on the ground. I agree with that.
And Ms. Wooden?
I think it'd be great for us to continue this discussion and look into this some more. I was in 3 major cities in the past year where they had a lot of bike facilities. They had dedicated bike lanes. They had the green stripes on the ground. And those cities are much larger than Wheat Ridge, Colorado. And they do have a lot of people using those facilities. And I think it's important to think about, if we put the facilities there, not only are we making it safer for cyclists to use the facilities, but we're also making it safer for more people to consider using the facilities. In other words, we're drawing more people in to be bikers. And we are hearing from the younger generations, and I just am saying younger generations, but overall, people are wanting to use alternative forms of transportation, and that one of those is including biking, possibly including biking as a commute to work or school or anything like that. So just because this hasn't been in Wheat Ridge, I don't want us to have a closed mind and not consider it. I hope we can have an open mind and consider things that are used in other countries, that are used in other cities. And I'd love for Wheat Ridge to be a leader in bicycle safety and how we might want to work with our citizens, offering alternative forms of transportation, instead of saying, no, that won't work here. And I really hope that we can have an open mind, look at these things, get more information, in turn get more information from the bicycling community. And yes, I completely agree. There's probably going to be a transition period if we decide to use this, where people will have to learn, and that means the cars will have to learn and the bikers will have to learn how to use them too. So I hope we can look at it going forward.
So we plan on coming back to council in another study session to talk about the final draft of the ordinances. Once we get them done, we could certainly have the ATAT team, the group, make a formal presentation. We can have them bring stats or whatever they can find about bike boxes, the lessons learned that Fort Collins has on them, and those kind of things. So I think we can definitely come back with a presentation on that.
Mr. Starker wants to say something?
You know, I think this might be a good opportunity to step back one step and look at how we integrate not just bike boxes, but how we integrate bicycles into our overall transportation system. And also how we look at, because maybe there are other things other than bike boxes out there that are part of the safety feature that would integrate bicycle traffic with automobile and vehicle traffic, and that we are able to have sort of a discussion, and more than that, how we teach our community and learn as a community to interact together on the roadway system that we have. So that, you know, I would probably make a consensus rather than to focus narrowly on sort of the things that we've been focusing now. If we have the opportunity, rather than moving in that direction on an incremental basis, rather we step back and look at sort of a more global way of how to integrate once again bicycles into the traffic flow, and how that happens safely, and how we teach it and understand it and achieve safety in our city.
So what I'm hearing you say is that rather than picking out one item as far as safety and bicycles, you would like to look at a more comprehensive package as to what other cities are doing, and a report from ATAT. Okay, now, go
I
ahead.
got something too.
Yes, I think,
Oh, well, I just wanted to quickly, we're talking about this traffic regulation, so I'm okay with ticketing people for parking. I think that makes sense to me, because I see cars parked in bike lanes all the time on Pierce. I also think that we should eliminate the ticketing of someone who does drive through. I mean, that's their own risk. If they want to drive through a bunch of cars to get to the front of the pack, more power to them, but I don't think they should get a ticket for it, especially if they survive it. So I think that.
Do you want to make some consensus on those?
So I would. So I would make a consent. So I would make a consensus that we eliminate the ticket for bicyclists going between cars for now, and then we would add the parking ticket for people who are parking in bike lanes.
So just
time restricted too.
Do those separately, maybe?
I have a few more things.
So we,
he was ready to make a comment, and I didn't
Okay.
get to hear him.
Okay.
So let me include Mr. Urban first.
Thank you. I guess to Mr. Starker's point around understanding a more cohesive plan regarding cyclists navigating through our city and talking about integration, I think that's an important path to look at as to how can we better integrate cyclists into the roadway versus creating segregated uses for them on the same roadway, which creates points of conflict. If we can encourage the sharing of the road versus the segregating of the road, that I think presents a more holistic approach to, bike safety, that it is a separate, different type of transportation, but it's on the same roadway, and it should be granted the same amount of space as you would give to any other vehicle. And by having those segregated uses, specifically a bike box, and going away from this element in here that talks about it currently being illegal to pass a stopped car, there's a reason for that. It's because it's an unsafe maneuver, and a car isn't expecting that maneuver to occur. And so I'm leery about moving away from that. I'm not interested in creating that sort of special maneuver available to only bicyclists, because it does create confusion for the motorist, and that's where accidents occur. On the parking enforcement element, in the city budget, we had a revenue in 2013 relative to parking fines of like $3,400. Where did that come in from, and what enforcement actions generated that revenue?
Handicap parking?
That was
I
separate.
think we actually have a separate line item for handicap parking. I think those are probably vehicles that has nothing to do with time parking. It's vehicles that are parked in illegal locations that can be ticketed. We have that enforcement rule, but we can't enforce timed parking.
And so what is the level of that enforcement? Is it a set citation amount? Is it a boot? Is it a towing? What's the progression?
I think that would have to be addressed in the ordinance or the fine schedule. Yeah, it'd have to be addressed. And if you guys decide to move forward, we'll bring that discussion forward.
Or we could just let Russ rent out their car.
Yeah, that's true.
What I'm hearing is that we're trying to answer these questions now and going through detailed discussion. And I think what the question before us is down the road a piece, can we have these separate discussions on these subjects?
So I'll make my consensus. I'll split them up.
Yeah.
So I would ask for one consensus that we bring forth the ordinance and changes to for no parking in the bike lane and restricted parking or timed parking. That's just all I'm asking for right now.
So yours would be really about a parking in either subject regarding bike lanes or timed, stated times.
Timed parking or
time
bike lanes.
limitations.
I think that's probably a no-brainer. We see it on Pierce, so that's my first consensus.
Okay.
I'm okay.
We're getting an okay on that one?
Okay.
Because that's going to deal with the spots on A1, up A1.
Exactly, and on Pierce. And then the other consensus, I agree with, I guess, Ms. Wooten and Mr. Starker, that we would maybe look at this at a more holistic approach of what can we do to make the experience for the bicyclist and the automobile more agreeable, than rather than just saying, here's a bike box. That would be a consensus. Look at other options just besides the bike boxes and bring those forward.
Bring those as kind of an overall bike safety.
Just as another discussion. Yep.
Exactly, at another discussion.
Okay.
Okay?
So did you get consensus
Any,
on both of Mr.
I've got
Tullio's?
those. Now I need consensus on we've got consensus.
No
on the
parking in
first
bike
one.
lanes. We got consensus.
Yep,
And then
that's
also
together.
enforcement
Now I
of
need it on
time
the other
parking. You both all
Well,
agree?
the other ones seem to be controversial, so I
Head
don't know.
nods.
Then the third one is to bring back a further discussion on integrating bike traffic with automobile traffic.
I don't know if there was a third one. I thought there was just two. We did all the bike safety ones together, and the parking thing was another one.
Yeah.
But we didn't do the one about giving someone a ticket who's going through that consensus wasn't made.
Giving them a ticket.
But
Not
it
giving
wasn't a ticket for going through the traffic, it was passing
cars.
stopped cars. I mean, it's not driving on the dotted line, it's passing in that right turn lane generally.
Wouldn't that all be part of the parking safety?
We could make that part of the discussion on further safety.
Right, that's what I meant.
Yep. So there's those three items.
All right, there's two.
3,
Okay, we'll go.
no parking in bike lanes,
Okay,
enforcement of time parking, and then a further discussion on bike safety.
okay,
If you put it like that, that's good.
Okay.
we're happy.
I just want to make sure I understood. Thank you.
And everybody is in consensus on these, and now 3 items? We're good.
Okay, we've got a fourth thing we want to talk about.
Oh, okay.
So, and this is the street width regulations. We just want to have, this was not part of your packet. This was something that came up. We met with Mr. Dahl last week on Thursday, and then did a quick scramble on Friday with some things. During this 32nd Avenue meeting, the meeting we had for the bike lanes, it was brought up, how are we getting around the charter provisions to do this project? And quite frankly, we just hadn't necessarily considered the charter provisions at that time. And I gave an answer for what I thought would be the reason we're doing it. In talking with Mr. Dahl, we need to do a street width designation on 32nd Avenue between Watts and Kipling. So we just want to have a quick conversation about this with you guys. So here's what our street width charter and code say. Is from flow line to flow line. Where there's curbs, it's the distance between the curbs. So as long as there's curbs on both sides of the street, we don't change those curbs, we can pretty much run amok within the street without kicking anything on the street width. When there are no curbs, the code defines it as the driving surface. And so what that's been interpreted as is when we have the 2 white lines striped on either side, that's the driving surface, because the rest of it's shoulder, parking, or whatever it is on the side of the street. So whatever's those 2 white lines, those what we call fog lines often in the industry, because it helps us in the fog to see where the road is what defines the driving surface of the road. So there are some exclusions in the code portion of our street width stuff right now, and those are projects that are less than 250 feet long, projects that are landscape features, I'm not really sure what that means, but they're in there. Traffic calming devices. Now in the code it actually says traffic claiming devices, So we'll fix that little word as when we do this. We'll make sure it's changed to traffic calming, because traffic claiming seems like it's a catching device. And then accel decel lanes, so essentially turn lanes, are also not included as a part of that. That projects that are only those things don't have to go through street width, even if you're widening the street or moving the curb or doing whatever. So on our bike ped projects that we're doing 32nd Avenue bike lanes from Watts to Sheridan. That's the eastern third of our project. There's curbs on both sides, so we can go in and restripe that road. We can move those lanes in to get 10-foot travel lanes. It allows us the room for the bike lanes, but also by narrowing those travel lanes to 10 feet, like we did on Pierce, it helps to slow the traffic down. I know that when I've driven Pierce, I've noticed that traffic definitely goes slower now than it did before. In the middle portion, from Kipling to Wadsworth, there's no curb on the south side except right at Wadsworth, about 400 feet of curb there. The rest of the 1.5 miles doesn't have curb. And on the north side, there's only curb from Holland West. So from the high school west, there's curb and gutter on the north side. So we're left with a little bit of a situation there. With the way the charter and the code read right now, I could widen that street in order to add bike lanes. I could widen 3 or 4 or 5 or 8 feet, whatever amount of pavement I want to. If I don't move those 2 white lines, I can widen the street as much as I want to, and it doesn't kick in the street width provisions. However, if I restripe the lanes to narrow the lanes down to 10 feet each, they're at 11 and 12 feet now, depending on some places 13 feet. If I narrow those down to 10 feet, which helps to slow the traffic, helps keep our project cost down, because now I don't have to widen as much to get that little narrow 3-foot bike lane we're proposing. I now have to go through a street width definition in order to do that project. And on Miller Street from 44th up to the South Frontage Road, we talked about there's no striping on that road really at all right now. It's sort of sporadic. We talked about putting 2 white lines down in order to define those travel lanes and make those the 2 10-foot lanes in there. We're on the portions where there's curb and gutter on both sides. I don't need a street width for those 2 portions. But on the portions where there's no curb and gutter, I need to do a street width designation on that piece. So it's a little psychotic right now with these bike project kind of things that we're doing with the way the charter is currently written, with the way the code's currently written. And so what we've looked at with the city attorney's advice, he thought that we could maybe add some additional exclusions and be very, very careful about the wording and the language of these additional exclusions. But in general, it would be a restriping project that reduces lane width. It doesn't change the number of lanes, but reduces lane width for traffic calming, the addition of bike lanes, maybe to demarcate on-street parking better. And with that project, in order to make people not think we're trying to run amok, we would only allow limited pavement widening of maybe up to 3 feet wide or something like that. So that's what we're looking at there. Now keep in mind, if I don't move the white lines that are there today, I could widen the road by 10 feet. I could make a 10-foot bike lane, and that wouldn't kick in the street width designation. It's the moving of the white lines in and out that does that. So by putting this additional requirement or criteria that I can't widen the road by more than 3 feet is to try to make sure that people don't think we're just trying to run amok, because we're certainly not trying to run amok. We're just trying to add some bike facilities. So the other thing that we thought of in the process, because I'm a drainage guy, that we thought of for this is at the east end of 32nd there, just west of Wadsworth, we've got a situation, every time it rains, a bunch of garbage and rock and gravel and dirt washes down onto Wadsworth from there and plugs up the inlet and creates a problem there. Well, we've talked about putting curb and gutter for several hundred feet. It'd be 400 or 500 feet along there in order to keep the water from washing on the shoulder, just to keep it in that curb gutter section. Well, if we did that project, that would actually require a street width designation, because we've moved the street width, the edge of the street, from the white line to that curb gutter line. So we'd like to also look at, if we're adding curb gutter to existing pavement, just improve drainage or to reduce edge of pavement or shoulder maintenance, not fundamentally changing the width of the street. Adding streetscape, including sidewalks. If I go into one of our streets that doesn't have a sidewalk on it, when I add a sidewalk and I put curb and gutter to add that sidewalk, I've now changed the street width according to our code and charter. So with that one, we'd like, again, to have the ability, just in case the road's wiggling a little bit, to be able to get a nice straight line, to be able to widen that pavement by, and it could be, I just said 2 feet on this because we're already getting 2 more feet because of the curb. And so those are the things we sort of have ideas about. And so questions on that, and this is what 32nd looks like today.
Interesting. Mr. DiTullio.
Well, I think you're playing with a little bit of fire here, because in 1995, I helped pass this and walk door to door with that petition. What it meant was flow line to flow line was curb to curb or asphalt to asphalt. It didn't talk about lines, Mr. Dahl, like moving lines. It was talking about flow line. So like if they want to add, if the city wants to add asphalt on both sides for a bike lane, that's changing the flow line. And I'm not against with the bike lanes. I'm not saying, but I think you have to just follow the process and not try to go around this, because I think you're getting those slippery slope.
Mr. Pond?
Well, I would ask, because I might interpret it the same way that you're saying, but actually consider that flow line in an uncurbed condition is even further away than the white line, because in most cases with a road with a crown, it's going to be the actual flow line, if you're talking about the flow along the road, is actually happening well beyond that in some sort of unimproved ditch on the side of the road. So in fact, it would be well beyond that line. So, I think you can see some different interpretations of that.
If I might, it's no question that the concerns are always raised in the curbless context. Where there are curbs, you're set. But the charter is pretty specific. It says if you're constructing or reconstructing a street such that you're changing the flow line, that triggers this process. So then you go to what flow line means, and the charter says what it means. It says where there are curbs, you measure from the inside edge of one curb to the inside edge of the other curb. It says where there are no curbs, flow line is the edge of the driving surface, that's the term it uses, on one side to the edge of the driving surface on the other. And it could well be that the actual water is flowing another 10 feet out. Doesn't matter, because in a curbless situation, even though it says flow line, it's the edge of the driving surface, which we have typically interpreted to mean pavement, because if people are capable of driving on it, that's the pavement. When I was asked, well, gee, can we put these lines, the answer I had was this, and obviously there's no question in 1995, and I think even Councilmember DeTullio would agree with me, there was not the difference between driving surface and the fog lines wasn't, a hot topic. But to me, if fog lines or any other kind of line is placed in a curbless context, it's curbless only, and if you're restraining and constraining the driving surface and saying you can't drive outside of this line, then you are affecting the street width in charter terms. And I agree that in this arena, a lot of people cared a lot about how this was written, and the exceptions that the council wrote into the code in 2003, and I wrote those, and soon you'll have more discussion, but it was important to me to emphasize that the council doesn't have the power to make the code say what the charter doesn't, or what the charter doesn't allow it to say. So you can't sort of unwind those limitations in the charter. The charter says driving surface, edge of the driving surface, and I think that you can deal a little bit with definitionally, as you have, and I think it was appropriate for the council in 2003 to say, accel decel is not really changing a street generally, and traffic calming devices, landscape features, that's all right. So I think you do have some room, but it has to just be structured really carefully, because the language of the charter, driving surface, can't be changed by the council by ordinance. You can certainly run a charter amendment to change what driving surface, is.
Mr. Starker?
I don't have the charter in front of me, but you all probably do. And it seems to me, if I recall, that these provisions on street width kick in when we're constructing or reconstructing a street. That's correct.
Now, does it sound like, and are we reconstructing a street or constructing a new street, or are we just doing some work in the shoulder?
It says flow line change.
Well, the introduction to that is if we're constructing or reconstructing a street, then these other features, flow lane and lines and all of that curb and gutter fall into that definition. But if we're not constructing or reconstructing a street, it seems to me like that we don't invoke Chapter 5 of the Charter.
That's correct, and that's the art, of course, is in what you say constructing or reconstructing is and is not. And the code sections actually took that approach and said construction or reconstruction, because you're absolutely right, that's the trigger that triggers the process. Said construction or reconstruction does not include the following things: axle, decel, landscape, traffic calming. So you could certainly, I suppose, add things like striping, striping activities which do not change the number of lanes in the street. Potentially, you could do that. The trick, I think, is being faithful to the intention of the charter provision, which is that if you're affecting people's lives along the street by changing the width of that street, that it should go through a more public process.
Madam Chair.
Mr. DiTullio.
So like you said, in 2003, we added those exceptions. And so can an exception be bike lanes in general? Just say bike lanes, and then that would take care of this problem? Because a bike lane really isn't going to be more than 2 or 3 feet, right? 4 feet.
Yes, I think you could, so long as I think it would be important to say bicycle lanes to the extent the number of traffic lanes in the street is not altered. Because I can conceive of the situation where you add a bicycle lane that can also double as a traffic lane, and now you have 3 lanes instead of 2 or something, or the reverse. And in either case, I think you've materially affected how people adjacent to the street feel about it and what the impact of it is on them.
So you could say bike lanes, not increasing lanes of traffic, or
striping for bicycle lanes to the extent the number of traffic lanes in the street is not affected. Just some language like that would work.
Madam Mayor. I think we should inform council, though, that we went ahead and started the process as if we were going through the charter, because letters went out. I got my letter today in the mail because of the timing. You remember, they're at, I think it's like a 90-day when.
There's a 45 day
yeah.
after the, and I don't have the date off the top of my head when we're going to come to council with that one, but there's a 45-day protest period after a council designates a street width, and that puts us in, we're going to come to council on May 11th with that, is why we got the mailing out so quickly. So on May 11th, the same day we come to you with the contract to do the project, to overlay 32nd and stripe it. Okay. We're also going to do the street width designation for 32nd Avenue, which is why we scrambled so quickly on Thursday and Friday, and it was in the Denver Post on Sunday and all those kind of things in order to meet the guidelines of the charter. There's a 45-day waiting period from that vote to when you can actually, when someone could protest it with a petition and call for a vote of the people and that kind of thing. So we don't want to stripe this street until we get past that 45
days.
So that puts us into late July for being able to do 32nd Avenue, which I think we can accommodate pretty easily.
Okay.
But in the
You've already
meantime,
provided for that.
we could still have this conversation.
All right, Mr. Fitzgerald.
So, just a question here, just so I can understand a little better. If we decide to add bike lanes as a definition, where would we add that? In the charter or in code?
You'd have to add it in the code. You don't, I mean, you could initiate a charter change, but honestly, you've already got a code section that implements the charter, and that's why it was done in 2003, is to address some things that really the charter didn't address, kind of was silent on. So you would add to that, and you'd simply add to a list of things that is considered not construction or reconstruction of the street, as mentioned by Mr. Starker, and probably the most straightforward would be the addition or deletion, because that could happen, of bicycle lanes that do not change the number of traffic travel lanes on the street, or some such language. We can add that to the list, and I think that keeps faith with the intention of the charter, because you can't, by ordinance, do something that unwinds the true intention of the charter, and I don't think that does.
We can try, but.
You can try, but you shouldn't.
I think Mr. DiTullio.
I'm okay with that coming forward as a possible code change to a study session.
Mr. Urban.
So just to be clear, on the 32nd Avenue proposal, are we adding any additional pavement to the driving surface?
We were planning on adding a couple of feet of asphalt, maybe up to 3 feet in one place. Where there's curb on one side, we're adding a little bit more on the south side. And we had someone that said, but I parked my cars there, so we're shifting we were gonna widen 32nd by 2 feet on each side, just basically make the shoulder wider on each side, which we've sometimes done as a part of a project, just because the shoulder's falling off, so we put a little more pavement out there just to sort of even things out and stuff like that. So we were adding 2 feet of pavement on either side. And one place where there's a resident that says, I've got bushes right here, I've got to park my car, we're going to shift that whole thing south. So it might be up to 3 to 4 feet on the one side that we're widening, but then not doing any widening on the other side. But the width of the pavement is going to stay the same and be consistent all the way down the street.
Well,
There's some minor widening with
Right.
what we had proposed to do with the project.
Okay. I guess my concern is that I understand in some cases we might be able to add a bicycle lane on a street with the remaining lanes remaining intact without adding additional square footage, if you will, along the roadway. But I would be cautious about making any more exclusions to this that would allow the addition of widening the road without actually widening the road because then what if the bike lanes go away or right.
Deletion. You'd mentioned deleting or adding bike lanes would be in that section 5.
Yes.
So in this case, we've got a relatively wide 2-lane road, and we're adding like 2 feet on either side to get a 3-foot bike lane. So we're moving that fog lane in a foot on either side to try to accommodate that bike lane through there to get 3 to 4 feet most of the distance through there. So in that case, if that went away, there'd still only be 6 to 8 feet of extra pavement. There wouldn't be enough for another whole lane. So that, again, I think if we word the charter correctly, we can avoid that slippery slope. Even if we're adding a little bit of pavement to the sides to make this bike lane project work out, it still couldn't be converted back to a 3-lane road someday without actually widening the street and doing something that would then kick in the street with designation. I think with Dahl's help, we can word something that takes care of that.
Clarity of intention would be
Yes.
important.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Last thing. I guess my other concern here is that this is the second example this evening where we've had a discussion on a non-agenda item, and I would have preferred a lot more lead time, especially on a discussion like this, because this is somewhat a contentious topic in Wheat Ridge. So I'm somewhat object to this entire discussion regarding Street Ridge because it wasn't on the agenda and there wasn't information provided ahead of time, and I would like there to be a lot more discussion around this later study session or as an ordinance gets brought forward, just because there's a reason why we have an agenda. There's a reason why we get a packet out ahead of time so we can make informed decisions and understand what's going on better. And I'd like us to have an agenda and stick to it.
I appreciate what you're saying. I think we had a time problem, didn't we?
Yeah, no, I agree with Mr. Urban too, and yeah, this would definitely have to come back for further discussion at a study session. It was a scheduled issue because of the timing that Mr. Westbrook spoke about of trying to get this project done this summer. And letters went out today, and we want to make sure that you guys were aware of that.
I appreciate it.
But yeah, it definitely, we can't move forward unless it comes back to further study session on agenda.
Thank you.
Yeah, and our biggest reason for bringing up tonight is just to alert you that we're going to come back on June 15th when we come back with the rest of the draft ordinance. We want to come back on June 15th with this as a 4th item on our draft ordinances to you, because we think this is a big deal. With 32nd, we did the street width, because that one we want to get going with the overlay project. On Miller Street, if we overlay Miller Street this year and we have to wait until this ordinance becomes active, assuming this all goes through, that we could do something like this on Miller Street, then we could wait to stripe that one until this fall, right before school starts, and that works out for us okay. What we'll do now is just overlay Miller Street and leave it the way it is today. So we haven't done a street width designation on Miller Street for that reason, but we did want to keep this thing moving forward so we can get it taken care of, so we can take care of Miller Street without doing a whole separate street width on it, if that works out.
I think council is okay with that? Okay. Did we need to do a consensus on this? I think.
It'd be nice, a consensus to bring this forward to future study session.
I'd ask for a
He already-
consensus that we would look at adding bike lanes, deletion or addition to bike lanes in section 5 of the code? Correct?
Yes.
Section 5 of the code?
No, it's 21-.
Oh, 21-3 for the code. So we would add the addition or deletion of bike lanes as an acceptable exclusion.
Mr. respond, or is this in agreement?
No, well, I do agree with that. I notice we've kind of either not gotten to or avoided the conversation about adding something that relates to drainage, and I don't know how, how important that is or not. Whether or not you were also asking for, or proposing that there may need to be an exclusion that relates to the ability to improve drainage conditions on a street width, and these regulations. So we've talked a lot about this specific issue of bike lanes, but I see on this, am I missing something here, or am I?
I was going to bring it up if you hadn't.
I just did. There we go. So I agree with what you're saying, but depending on what other information related to drainage, I would probably agree that gets.
Can we just do my consensus? Yep. Okay, and then we'll go on the drainage.
All right. We've got a consensus on
Drainage, bike lanes.
Just bike.
Now, do we need one on drainage?
Yeah,
We need to
what about
complete
these other-
all the other
what about
things.
the
I think
other
we need to look at all of those.
Well, I think the most important one was the bike lanes. I mean, these can come back with that study session, and then we can address these further. I think isn't the addition or deletion of bike lanes going to take care of a lot of these?
It takes care of most of our restriping
Yeah,
situations.
it takes care of most of them.
The curb gutter is a somewhat different issue, and so if you're okay with that, we'll explore that also, just if we're doing a curb gutter project, improve drainage or reduce shoulder maintenance,
Yeah.
those kind of things.
What's this one?
So to be explored and brought forward
Yeah.
as a proposed exclusion. That's fine. That's fine.
For building curb gutter, that's not street reconstruction, is essentially what we'd be looking at.
Okay. So we are including the other additional items that you've listed here.
For future discussion.
For
In the
future discussion.
In the future discussion.
Yeah, in the
Are we
future
doing that as a
discussion, so
separate
that-
future discussion?
Yes.
Separate future discussion.
Yes.
And to be clear, that's related to adding curb and gutter, not replacing existing curb and gutter, correct?
That's just maintenance.
The additions that are listed right there.
Yeah.
Exclusions.
Okay, so
Are we in-
consensus on that.
He made a consensus, right?
Yeah. Yes, I would make the consensus that we bring the curb and gutter as it relates to drainage and these other items for future study.
Now we need a consensus on that. Mr.
So schedule, we're planning on coming back on June 15th, assuming that Patrick lets me do it on that day. And then what we planned on doing, when this was just a floodplain thing, I planned on having a public meeting because I can do some more education with folks and I get points for having the meeting and all those kind of things. We can certainly still do that. I just don't know how we advertise that meeting. Do we send out a mailing to everyone that lives along a street in the city that might have I don't know how to do that. If we can have the public meeting and just have it sort of be announced in general on July 1st, or we could do some kind of a targeted mailing with certain types of projects, or I'm not sure what to do with that now that we've got all these other things lumped into what was going to be a floodplain ordinance change.
Can't you really work that out with the city manager with the
certainly
timing? Yeah. I don't think we need to get into the scheduling.
So we're going to go to the Building Code Advisory Board because we need to do that with the electrical permit stuff and also the septic tank stuff. We'll go to Planning Commission on July 9th, and then we'll come back to council at the end of July and the first meeting in August, hopefully for first and second reading. We do have a little bit of a time crunch on this. We're going through our recertification visit, re-verification visit with the folks this year on our floodplain stuff, so that has to be done by September-ish timeframe. So that's the reason we're trying to rush this along. And this schedule is different than what was in the packet. I re-looked at the schedule and
Okay.
thought since Dahl's helping us write these things, we can probably move up part of it. I'm not the one writing all the ordinances, so we're all good.
Great. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. We're done with that.
We're done.
We're done. All right. Thank you again, Mark. City managers matters.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. If anybody hasn't seen yet, the new Starbucks on 38th and Kipling opened today.
Oh, it did?
So yes, it's open. The Sprouts is scheduled for June 24th. So that project is moving right along. Also would like to address an email Mr. DiTullio sent out this afternoon about the Arvada ponds up on Ward Road. This city of Arvada owns those, the pond, one of those ponds. It's in the city of Wheat Ridge. They put it up for sale recently. We found out through a reporter. But Joyce Manwaring has scheduled this for a next month's meeting with the Parks and Rec Commission to talk about that property, to see if that they would want to consider that as adding that to an asset to the city's park system. And then we'll bring back any recommendation they may have to council at a future study session. So,
Thank you.
Madam Chair, did you get this letter from?
I did not. I heard about it. I haven't seen it, but I think Joyce did.
That's just a letter from a constituent in District 3, I believe, asking for the city to look at it. So.
Yep.
Okay. Are you done with? When did you say Sprouts was going to open?
They're scheduled for June 24th.
June 24th. City Attorney's matters.
Nothing tonight, thanks.
City Clerk.
I have two things. One, I wanted to, I believe the council knows, but I wanted to just publicly offer my sympathies to the family of Phil Plummer. Phil Plummer lived in, I don't know how long he's lived in Wheat Ridge, but he's coached Little League way back when and helped run Little League football. He was on the planning commission for a number of years, and most recently on the Building Code Advisory Board, and was at the meeting in February that they had. And he passed away a week ago, yesterday, I believe, so, or today. But so he's a real champion of the city. He's a real positive guy with a lot of energy and always looking for ways to keep Wheat Ridge special and have good things for the city. So we'll miss him. And then I have another issue. I've talked with Mr. Dahl, and actually Patrick and I have talked a couple of times about this. Chapter 7 is our election chapter of our code, and there are some pieces of that are very seriously outdated because of timelines and dates as it relates to coordinated elections with the county, and also now the ever-present mail-in ballot, that some of the timelines in our Chapter 7 just don't even make sense. They don't fit. I mean, it doesn't work. They don't do this well. So if, with your blessing, I've talked to Mr. Dahl that we could, that he and I could work together, look at Chapter 7 and bring forward some suggested revisions for you to look at a study session, and hopefully get this done before this year's coming election. I think there's some things we could probably just eliminate. There's certainly some things that I think, well, I shouldn't be presumptuous since I don't set policy, but many local jurisdictions, cities, there are some things that they keep special about their city instead of just having everything be the Colorado Revised Statutes, the Municipal Election Code. We can certainly use a lot of that, but there may be a thing or two that we want to retain that has been unique to Wheat Ridge, but some of these timelines are just don't work with coordinating with the county, so that for sure has to be changed, I think. But with your blessing, we will do this. I don't know if you need specific, if it requires a motion or consensus or anything, but I'm asking that you would have us do that.
Are those charter changes?
No, just the code Chapter 7.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, historically that chapter was quite long, and 10 years ago or so, or 15, I worked with Wanda Sang to shorten it considerably, and I think we've done it a couple of times, and each time it gets shorter. Some cities, as the city clerk pointed out, don't bother with an election code, local election code at all, and just rely on the municipal election code, which the problem is keeps getting tinkered with by the legislature every few years in good ways. And mail balloting, for example, it just wasn't really on the radar screen some time ago. And for that reason, I think the Chapter 7 could be significantly shorter even than it is now, and eliminate the coordination problems the city clerk mentioned. I think it's a good thing to take up, and it would not be that hard to do.
So you're recommending it? Council? Mr. Urban?
My question for the city attorney is relative to the section 7-1 that talks about the state statute governing all elections in general, and doesn't that catch everything at the front end?
It does, but then we go on to have other requirements, and on balance, I'd like it to be, I think, a little more clear that it doesn't expressly say, look, if here's the state statutes, they apply, but it needs to go on and say, and to the extent there's a conflict, who wins, it would be good to say. And honestly, to the extent there are conflicts that we can avoid just by getting rid of some stuff we have, I'd like to be able to do that. But you're right, 7-1 at a minimum will keep that, and say this is where we go for most everything except these few remaining items we want to deal with locally. Thanks.
Madam Mayor, I'd ask for consensus that the city attorney be allowed to work with the city clerk's office and bring back some code changes to Chapter 7 to a study session.
I'll second. If that's a secondable.
It's consensus.
Looks like we have consensus on that.
Thank you.
Okay, moving along to elected officials matters. Mr. Tulio, you want to start?
Nothing tonight.
Mr. Urban?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to invite everybody down to Hopper Hollow Park on Saturday, May 2nd at 10 a.m. There's going to be a open park, as you will, to have a grand opening of sorts. So that'll be kind of exciting for the neighborhood. So invite everybody down to that. And that's all I have. Thank you.
I believe that's at 10.
At 10 a.m., yes.
Mr. Starker?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to add my congratulations to the car team from Wheat Ridge High School. I think that's a great accomplishment for that team and for our city. And I would like to express my thanks and way to go for a very successful Kite Flight Festival last Saturday, which it was very well attended. And when I was there, it looked like everyone was having a good time. So thank you to the volunteers and the city staff, and I know the police department and the parks people and other staff members were instrumental in making that happen, and great work by a lot of really dedicated citizens. So thank you very much.
Kite flight was great. Tracy, that was your original idea, wasn't it? And it was just, they've added so much to it as far as it's gone beyond kite flying. It's like, a day of fun. There's so many other things they've added to it. It was really, really great. Mr. Bond.
Thank you. I'll just reiterate, I was going to mention that I had a chance to go to Kipling Ridge this morning and have some coffee, and it was great. I recall I was just looking that we got our shovels out and our hard hats on October 10th, and so it's just it's great to see the improvements. Driving by, it's even better to see them stopping by, shopping, and I look forward to the Sprouts opening and continuing to shop there. Thanks.
Nothing.
Thank you. I guess I would like to mention that we had a banner kite flight year. We had about 1,500 people. It gets a little tricky because people come up our green belt and then we click at the front and not always at the back. But Scott from Vinyl Works donated a great deal of our banners, so we'd like to thank Scott for all the hard work that he's done. Care Bear Bakery was there with some kite-shaped cookies, and the kids were having a great time frosting them and decorating them. And Teller Street Gallery was there with some crafts as well. So, and also we partnered this year with the Wheat Ridge Fire Department, we had the fire department from Wheat Ridge and Arvada, but Wheat Ridge Police Department on their Children's Safety Fair. So they gave away helmets, bike helmets, they gave away car seats, they tested car seats to make sure people were buckling their kids in safely. I don't know how many they actually did, but my understanding is their numbers went up substantially. So we were able to help them reach additional people, and their people were able to come and have fun with us. The wind wasn't a fantastic wind day, but there was enough fun things to go on around it. So I don't think any of the kids left the festival going, well, boy, this wasn't fun. But so it's always exciting to see families come to Wheat Ridge and people using our parks in a way that just gets so much more out of it. And then the Flight for Life landed, which was quite the thrill for the families. So I just would like to thank everybody who helped us. Margie Cipher is really the powerhouse that motivates people, and on all of our board members who let us have such a wonderful event.
Councilmember Wooden.
Also, thank you to everybody that participated in the Kite Flight Festival. In the Parks and Recreation Master Plan that we just passed tonight, part of the polling that was done said that people wanted more events to attend. So I think it's great that we continue to add events that people can attend in our parks and that we're following what our citizens are looking for. Another thing I'd like to just bring up briefly for council to consider in the future, and this is partly due to the last item that was on our meeting tonight about the charter, and then also what Janelle just brought up, are outdated things in our city. Our city was founded in 1969, and the charter from back then is also outdated. And I'd like for the council to consider a charter commission to look at updating our charter. So to be brought forward for the future, a charter commission to look at other updates that need to be done to our charter, and that would be different from the code that Janelle talked about, but really looking at how our city has changed, how the economy has changed, and how actually Wheat Ridge is not the rural community it once was. How can we retain some of that rural community feel, but also change with the times and become a thriving city? So I'd like to look at that in the future.
Thank you. All right, we're about at the end of the meeting. There's one more thing that I want to mention. Coffee with the Mayor will be returning to Wednesdays, May 6th at 9 in the morning through 10. We'll have coffee as well as those Care Bear delicious little goodies. So I hope that some of you will attend, as well as anybody who's left still listening out there. And with that, I believe I can adjourn the meeting.